Hello, George Hepworth here, Grover Park Consulting. Welcome back to our series on building Mike's Mobile Library. Mike's Mobile Library is a hybrid application with an interface in Microsoft Access on the Windows desktop and an interface in PowerApps running in the cloud. The database behind these two interfaces, the common database between these two interfaces, is a set of SharePoint lists. If you refer back to video 1, you can learn a little bit about myself, and why I started this project, what my goal here is for the project. I also introduced you to the interface in the Access relational database application. In video 2, which was day 2 of this project, I introduced you to the PowerApps application interface and walked through the screens and showed you how the application functioned in the cloud environment, in the browser. Today, we're going to take a step behind those two interfaces and look at the tables in this relational database application. What we're looking at here on the screen is actually the relationship window in Access. I decided that the best way to show that would be with a screenshot rather than try to work live with the relationship window, because quite frankly it was difficult to read these fonts, and I think they're still going to be a little bit difficult. They're a little bit on the small side, but I think they're viewable here. You can see them. As far as the tables are concerned, these are actually SharePoint lists sitting in my Microsoft 365 SharePoint site. They are linked into the Access front end, where they function as tables. They are also linked into the PowerApps application as the data source for the various screens there. In Access, we have the ability to alias the tables in Access. They're still linking to the underlying table with its original name, but we can rename them anything we want, and I decided that for the sake of clarity, I would put the suffix SP on all of these tables to identify them as SharePoint list tables. That really isn't necessary for someone who is familiar with how Access tables are typically designed and what we see here in these tables. As I said in day 2, the tables were originally created as SharePoint lists and then linked to Access. It's also possible to create the tables originally in Access, export them to SharePoint as SharePoint lists, and then link those lists back. You can do it either way, and in fact there is a video which I will link in the descriptions where a colleague of mine, Albert Kallal, talks about doing that very thing. However, I decided to just start originally with SharePoint lists, partly just to see if I could do it that way, see how much it would take to do that. The result is, as you see, SharePoint put in a number of fields. These are sort of default fields, I guess, that SharePoint automatically puts into lists in SharePoint. The great majority of these I don't use, I won't use. I can't see any value to using them either in the Access side or the SharePoint side as the data source for PowerApps. However, they're there by default, and rather than delete them, I decided that since this is a training video, I would leave them in and just explain to you as you see them. You will probably see something like this, where you have the compliance asset ID, this attachments field, file type, workflow instance, all these fields that are added by SharePoint. Not to worry about it. They don't hurt anything to have them there. You can delete them if you want, but because they are there by default, I thought you should at least get a chance to see them and not be puzzled if you happen to see them in your own SharePoint lists and don't know where they came from. The primary table is the publications table. And as you can see, we have a primary key designated. This will be an auto number, and it's designated in SharePoint as an auto incrementing number. When it's linked to Access, it is surfaced as an auto number field. Publication title, all the other fields that we saw in the two interfaces. There is a one-to-many relationship between publication genre and the genre ID. The one means this is the one side, links to many on the many side. You can't see it here because Access in the relationship window doesn't reveal that, but this is actually a lookup field. The genre ID in table publication is a lookup field. I know that most professional, experienced Access developers do not like and will not use lookup fields in tables in Access. However, the only way to establish and enforce referential integrity in SharePoint is through the mechanism of this lookup field. So this is, in fact, a lookup field, as are all of the foreign keys. Everywhere you see a foreign key, that is a lookup field. There's one missing here. I believe this is actually enforced, and I can verify that later when we look at the SharePoint lists in SharePoint. Remind me if I forget, but I want to verify that this one is actually there and just didn't make it into the diagram. Publisher, one-to-many to the publisher ID. Publication transfer, this is a junction table. It sits between the publication and a participant. And a participant, it is any entity or individual involved in buying, selling, loaning, borrowing, owning volumes in my library. Amazon is here. My friend Mike, who will be the owner of the library when it's finished, will be here. This is a junction table. There's a foreign key from the publications table and a foreign key from the participant table. This allows us to handle the many-to-many relationship between those two. Participant status, this indicates whether they're the owner, the buyer, the seller, the borrower, and so on. The genre, the type of material. The condition, from mint to trashed. Media type, whether it's a book or a CD or a DVD. The creator, the publication creator, junction table, and the publication. And again, a many-to-many, where we have one creator can create multiple publications, and one publication can have multiple creators or authors. And I used the example of one of the books on which I was a co-author to illustrate this. If you look at video from day one or from day two, you'll see that relationship. Many to many with two foreign keys. And again, these are also lookup fields in these tables. By the way, I will foreshadow an issue that we're going to run into later when we're implementing these in the PowerApps application. It turned out that creates an additional complication in PowerApps. As I said earlier, experienced Access developers don't like to use lookup fields. There's a problem that surfaced when I was trying to work with these in the PowerApps application. Different kind of problem, but nonetheless, it just illustrates that they're just kind of problematic and best avoided if you can avoid it. We have to use them here to enforce referential integrity. Okay, now we're ready to look at the actual SharePoint lists themselves. I've launched the browser, navigated to my SharePoint site, selected Mike's library as the subsite where these SharePoint lists live. You can see the same names as we just looked at in the relationship window, minus the SP. In the Access side, again, I suffixed those table names with the SP to indicate that they came from the SharePoint source. So we have the publication, the creator, and the junction table, which links them. Let's start by looking at publication once again. We can select the three little dots, pick Settings, and we get to look at how this table is defined. Again, this is a view of that particular table or SharePoint list, and it doesn't expose all of the potential fields. It only exposes some of them in this view. They're there, and we'll see in a second as we go to the next screen that they are actually there. They're just not exposed in this view. Publication title is a single line of text. Number of volumes is the number. We have different data types, as you would expect, based on what kind of data is going to go in there. Single line of text, of course, for the title. The number of volumes for 1, 2, 3, how many books are in that title, and it's a number. There is our genre ID, which, as I said before, is a lookup field. So let's start by looking at it. We select it here, and that brings us to the screen where we can give it a name. We can allow nulls or not allow nulls. We can enforce unique values or not enforce unique values. If we enforced unique values, we could only have one volume or one book of each genre type. This is the lookup table from publication genre. We get this column. This indicates whether we want a multi-value field or not. Never, 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 never use multi-value fields, please. And we can actually bring in additional fields along with our ID field. I never do that. It's as close as I can actually get to a pure foreign key looking field without all that extra clutter of having additional fields. But you could, if you wanted to, bring them along, any one of those fields or multiple fields. You can apply formatting to it, bold text or italic text or something like that. Here's where we enforce relationship behavior. We restrict delete, or we cascade delete. Now this is sort of an echo of what we can do on the access side. We enforce relationships. That means that we have to have a value in the table for here genre types before we can assign a value into that field in the publication table. And we cannot delete a record from the publication table, from the genre table, if there is an existing record in the publication table with that value, with that foreign key value. So that's basically what a lookup field looks like in SharePoint, and we're going to cancel without making any changes. As I said, we can do some other things. We can order the way the columns appear. Title first, public number of volumes, and so on. This is entirely up to you. Just like in an access table, you can shuffle the fields in the order in which they appear. Cancel that. What else do we want to see? Okay, we can alter the view so we can see additional views. And as I showed you in the relationship window in the first part of the video, there are other fields that are not making it into this view. We can look at which columns or fields have indexes on them. All of my lookup fields, my foreign key fields, are indexed, and this does not show the index on the primary key, but it is there. And we can index other fields if we decide we need them for better performance. Okay, so if we go back, let's just do it this way. And look at this junction table. Again, pick settings. And I'm just going to quickly look at the creator ID, which is a lookup field to the creator table, publication ID, which is a lookup to the publication table. We just looked at one of these lookup fields in the publication table. Let's take a quick look here. Same thing. It's a lookup field, not required. Can't make it unique. We'd only be able to have one creator. I never want to see multiple value fields. Don't like to drag in extra text fields. And we always enforce relational referential integrity. Sometimes I get relationship and referential integrity and I get all tongue-tied, but we're going to restrict deletion of records if there's an existing record in this junction table. Click cancel to get out of here. We could look at the publication ID, which is the same thing. Okay, well, we'll just do it this way. Navigation in the browser can be a bit confusing, I guess, if you're not used to working here all the time, as I'm not, being an Access developer. This is the data in that table. As you can see, it just consists of primary key and 2 foreign keys. There are additional columns that we can add, and these are those built-in, these are not built-in fields, these are data types for additional fields we can add to the table on the fly. Let's go back one more time. Okay, we have taken a look at the tables, or at least some samples of the tables. We've seen them in the relationship window. We know all the tables that are here, the tally table. Let's look at that quickly here, and it just simply, as we saw in Access, is one field with, I believe at this point, 100 records, and we can use that as a way to support it's not really a record set looping, but an ability to implement a process very similar to that in a PowerApps application. Okay, so we've seen the two interfaces, we've seen the table structures, we've seen the relationship window, and a little bit about how the tables are designed. So the next step is going to be rebuilding or recreating or duplicating, if you will, this application from my mobile library. You notice right away that I have referred to it as my mobile library because this is the template or prototype, we should say, proof of concept perhaps. We'll rebuild it as Mike's mobile library in the following days as we work together through recreating each of the screens, the startup screen, which is this one, publications, the edit screen for publications, and so on. I have a couple of additional screens in this application. I'll explain the options screen when we get to that point in our rebuild. This is an idea I got from watching other YouTube videos of other PowerApps developers, and I liked what I saw there, and I thought I'm going to incorporate that here. I'll explain that and show that at the beginning of our development process. We have a backup, and as we all know, when we're working on something, step one is to create a backup. Step two is to start changing things. So this is just by way of reminding me to remind you that you always want to start with a backup. In our next video, we will start with the apps function of a PowerApps application and rebuild each of the screens that you see here. So, if you like what you've seen so far, and I hope you do, please hit the like button and subscribe so that you can be reminded of future videos. Also, please provide any feedback you have in the comments to these videos. I would like to know your impression of what you see. How well does it match your experience, your needs? Does it reflect what you would expect from a PowerApps application? Do you see where it would fill a need or fall short of filling a need in your work environment and so on? Any feedback you can provide me would be greatly appreciated. I appreciate your attention, and I will see you next time.